Hey guys, tonight we're slipping softly into the golden clouds above the mortal world, where the air smells like crushed myrtle and divine judgment, and the floors are polished with ambrosia, soaked vanity. You're in Olympus now, and the first thing you see, a goddess, draped in white and emerald, standing before a mirror that doesn't reflect light so much as absorb it, and glare back. Hera, queen of the gods, wife of Zeus, matron of marriage, protector of women, goddess of queenship, and perhaps the single most gifted passive, aggressive entity in all of mythological history. You probably won't survive this story emotionally, but that's okay. Hera doesn't either. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Let me know where you're watching from and what time it is for you right now. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You float gently into the throne room of Mount Olympus. The columns are alabaster and impossibly tall, like they were designed by someone trying to impress eternity itself. Hera sits alone, not sulking, not storming, just polishing a comb made from the shell of a divine oyster, and pretending not to think about her husband's latest business trip to Thessaly. Around her, the other gods give her a wide berth. Even Ares, her notoriously bloodthirsty son, quietly exits stage left. And you get it, because you've been near someone like Hera before. She doesn't yell. She doesn't scream. She just rearranges the universe until you feel vaguely guilty and don't know why. She wasn't always like this, of course. Once, Hera was radiant, a deity of dignity, of structure, a divine pillar of devotion in a realm of chaos and moonlight affairs. But then she married Zeus, which was sort of like marrying the sky. If the sky also had boundary issues and a shifting kink. You hear it whispered in Olympus that their union began with an elaborate trick. Zeus, transforming into a helpless cuckoo bird during a thunderstorm, shivering on her windowsill. And Hera, heart soft despite everything, bringing the poor little bird to her chest to warm it. Which, of course, is when Zeus transformed back into himself. Classic. Mainstream scholars agree. This marks the beginning of their marriage and the near end of Hera's sense of humor. You drift through the halls of the god's palace, where everything sparkles a little too much, like it's trying to distract you. Servants in gold, threaded tunics glide past, avoiding eye contact. One of them whispers to another. She's in another one of her silences, which is code on Olympus for brace yourself. Because Hera's silences are not empty. They are orchestras of unspoken fury, arranged with the precision of a funeral dirge. And the longer she stays quiet, the more certain you can be that somewhere a nymph is about to develop spontaneous cow syndrome. Still, she's not entirely without grace. Hera is the reason weddings have structure. She's the reason vows exist. She's the goddess invoked when someone says, "Till death do us part," and only mostly means it. In fact, to ancient Greeks, she represented order, loyalty, the very idea that society needed rules, and someone to enforce them with a smile that could curdle honey. Her temples were among the earliest built in Greece. Massive stone constructions dedicated not to war or wine or beauty, but to the complex idea of fidelity. Which is deeply ironic, considering her husband was off making constellations with mortals like it was a hobby. Quirky fact for you. Peacocks weren't always her sacred animal. Before Argus, they were just fancy chickens with an attitude. But Hera made them her symbol, after embedding the eyes of her slain, many-eyed servant into their feathers. Because what's more poetic than weaponizing grief into fashion? Historians still argue whether Hera was truly revered as a standalone goddess, or simply as Zeus's wife. Some believe her mythology is layered over an older, pre-Olympian goddess of women and sovereignty, lost to time and rewritten to be more wifely. Others say no, she always had teeth. That even before the thunderbolts and cow curses, she was a force. A queen not despite the drama, but because of it. You linger by a column as Hera stands. She adjusts her crown, not because it's slipping, but because she likes the sound it makes. There's a quiet sigh in the air. And somewhere in the mortal world, a shepherd's wife gets pregnant with twins, who look suspiciously like the king. Hera knows. She always knows. And she's already planning the most dignified retaliation imaginable. It will involve starlight, serpents, a very disappointed owl, and a glare that echoes for centuries. But for now, she walks quietly down the hall, graceful, regal, her peacock trailing behind, tail fanned like an apology no one believes. You follow the soft clack of her sandals. Stone floors hum underfoot, cool, silent, and polished by centuries of drama. Even the wind that drifts through the open colonnade seems hesitant, like it's read the room and decided to tiptoe. And there, at the end of the corridor, you spot him. Zeus, king of the gods, lord of thunder, and currently, the most suspiciously relaxed husband in the universe. He's lounging on a throne made of clouds, lightning bolts tucked under his arm like loose scrolls. Smiling. A little too much. You slow your pace. Hera does not. She moves like a queen accustomed to walking through storms, and possibly causing them. Darling, Zeus says, voice dripping with the kind of honey that comes from a hive you shouldn't trust. You look radiant. Hera smiles. Barely. It's the kind of smile that has a footnote, a preface, and an entire hidden clause about vengeance. You wait. So does he. Because this, right here, this is the part where even gods hold their breath. You see, the thing about their marriage is that it's less a romance and more an arms race. And the moment you think the drama has peaked, nope. Here comes another Olympian passive. Aggressive maneuver with a fruit basket and a curse baked in. Zeus's greatest power. Lightning. Hera's. Timing. Today's dispute began like most, with a rumor. A shepherd's daughter. Or a mountain nymph. Or, let's be honest, some poor soul just trying to drink from a sacred spring without getting divine attention. Either way, the mortal is now very pregnant. And Hera has had enough. She doesn't yell. Instead, she makes things awkward. Painfully, cosmically awkward. First, she casually drops into a conversation with the fates, asking, very politely, whether they're planning any surprises for Zeus this season. Then she swings by the hours, who manage the timing of events, to ask if a few hiccups could be arranged. Meanwhile, Zeus starts inventing thunderstorms just to have an excuse to leave the house. Mainstream myth says they rule Olympus together, side by side. But in practice, it's a chess match played on a board made of marble. egos, and centuries of grudges. You float beside Hera as she sits across from Zeus. They share a meal. Sort of. Hera daintily nibbles on a pomegranate seed. Zeus tears into a roast lamb with the enthusiasm of someone who thinks chewing loudly is a power move. She asks about the weather in Thessaly. He says it's been unusually cloudy. She smiles and comments that clouds tend to follow guilt. He nearly chokes on a grape. And just like that, round one goes to Hera. The other gods avoid eye contact. Aphrodite, brushing her hair in the background, quietly slips away. Apollo pretends he's suddenly blind. Even Dionysus fakes sobriety just to avoid being dragged into whatever's brewing. It's all very civilized. Until it isn't. Because here's the thing. When Hera gets really mad, she doesn't scream. She elevates. She redirects. She turns pain into policy. Quirky fact for you. Hera once got so irritated with one of Zeus's side adventures. She created her own exclusive island, Samos, and declared it the new epicenter of pious matrimony. Mortals flocked to it, built temples, held festivals, sacrificed peacocks. And all the while, Hera smiled. Because she didn't need to punish Zeus directly. She just outshone him. In heels. Historians still argue whether Hera's character is meant to be sympathetic or monstrous. Some say she's framed unfairly, reduced to a nagging wife stereotype by later patriarchal retellings. Others believe she's an accurate embodiment of ancient social contracts, powerful, proud, and terrifying in equal measure. A queen in a world where power is usually loud, but hers whispers and stings. Back at the table, Zeus reaches for her hand. She lets him. For a moment. Then she picks up her goblet, sips delicately, and asks, without blinking, "So, what did she look like this time?" Zeus blinks. You do too. Because there it is. The most powerful tool in Hera's arsenal. The well-timed question. Sharp enough to split a mountain. Soft enough to sound like a lullaby. He says nothing. She smiles again. And somewhere in the mortal world, a thunderstorm begins. But not in the sky. In a marriage. Because Hera doesn't need to hurl bolts. She just waits. Let's guilt ferment. Let's silence do the heavy lifting. And as you walk with her back through the marble halls, you realize something. This isn't just myth. It's performance art. A divine masterclass in the politics of emotion. And tonight, the queen has played her part to perfection. The clouds gather behind you as you walk. You're not sure whether they're real or emotional. On Olympus, those lines blur. You follow Hera into her private chambers, where even the air seems curated. It smells faintly of wild thyme and old grudges. The walls are draped in silk the color of envy. Rich, shimmering, and too elegant to be accidental. In the corner, a golden cage sits open. Empty. Swinging gently. She once kept a dove there. Or possibly a metaphor. She's not alone. You notice the painter. A mortal artist. Brought up by Hermes last week. Trembling with awe. And possibly fear. He's been commissioned to paint Hera's likeness. A gesture, she says, of legacy. But you sense it's something else. A test. She sits still as marble while he works. He fumbles with his brushes. One drop of paint lands on his tunic, and he flinches like the color might be cursed. You can't blame him, even when she's silent. Hera radiates the kind of power that makes you want to apologize for something you haven't done yet. You glance at the canvas. He's tried to capture her gaze. He's failed. There are some things mortals just don't have the palate for. You remember the time Zeus turned himself into a swan, or a bull, or a shimmering shower of gold. It's hard to keep track. The myths get slippery. But Hera remembers each one. She doesn't need to write them down. She's got an internal filing cabinet organized by insult level and type of poultry involved. You wonder how she keeps from exploding. She doesn't. She delegates. Take Io, for example. A priestess of Hera. A mortal woman. Loyal. Pious. Beautiful. Which, in Greek myth, is basically asking for trouble. Zeus noticed her. Of course. And when Hera appeared mid-flirt, Zeus panicked. Classic move. He turned Io into a cow. A literal, wide-eyed, milk-giving cow. To protect her from Hera. Now, here's where it gets wonderfully absurd. Hera, pretending not to know, says, "What a lovely cow. May I keep her?" Zeus, sweating from places even gods shouldn't sweat, agrees. Because saying no to Hera is a faster route to ruin than saying yes to fate. She assigns Argus to guard Io. Argus, the giant with 100 eyes. He never sleeps. At least not all at once. So while 50 eyes nap, the other 50 glare suspiciously. Io the cow is stuck. Wandering. Chewing grass. Being divine collateral damage. Because when Hera chooses revenge, she doesn't go for drama. She goes for duration. Mainstream fact, Argus was one of Hera's oldest loyalists. A primordial being with endless vigilance. No myth dares question his devotion. He was made for watching. And Hera made use of him. Until Hermes snuck in, ordered by Zeus to free Io, and lulled Argus to sleep with stories and music. When the last eye closed, it never opened again. Hera was livid. Not loudly, but in that ancient, echoing way where the universe gets colder by a single, imperceptible degree. She took Argus's eyes and placed them on the tail of her favorite bird. Thus, the peacock, a walking tapestry of memory and silent accusation. Each eye a reminder, each feather a monument. Because when you're the goddess of marriage, nothing gets swept under the rug. It gets immortalized in plumage. Quirky fact. Peacocks scream. It's not graceful. They wail like rusty hinges and lost souls, especially during mating season, which feels metaphorically appropriate, given the circumstances. Hera keeps several in her garden. For aesthetic, and possibly catharsis. Historians still argue whether Hera's mythology was meant to empower or to warn. Was she a cautionary tale of jealousy? Or an emblem of divine dignity in a universe designed for chaos? Some say her legacy was shaped more by male poets than by ancient prayers. Others point to her temples. Lavish, ancient, fiercely respected, as proof of her real world reverence. Either way, she endures, not through affection, but through ritual. Back in her chamber, the painter finishes. He's pale. He bows, stammers something reverent, and nearly trips over a tapestry on the way out. Hera doesn't look at the painting. She already knows how it turned out. Instead, she rises, walks to the open balcony, and watches as a storm gathers in the distance. Thunderclouds bruising the horizon like old secrets resurfacing. You stand beside her, and for a moment, you feel the weight of her silence. It's not sad. It's sovereign. She doesn't need to speak. The peacocks scream for her. You wake, not from sleep, but from the lull of Hera's quiet rage. Because now you're elsewhere. The scenery shifts softly. The clouds melt into green pastures and low stone walls. You're somewhere between myth and farmland. And standing in a field. A cow. You know her name already. Io. Her ears flick at invisible flies. Her eyes, still strikingly human, scan the horizon with the slow, resigned blink of someone who's realized they're part of a very elaborate metaphor. You walk beside her. She doesn't startle. She just sighs. If a cow can sigh, she's been walking for days, or maybe centuries. Time bends in mythology, especially for victims. Across rivers, through groves, past indifferent statues and whispering mortals. All of it, because of a kiss, or a look, or maybe nothing at all. The thing no one says out loud on Olympus. Hera doesn't punish the crime. She punishes the inconvenience. You watch as Io stumbles near a stream. She looks into the water and sees her reflection. A face once called divine, now wearing the wrong skin. And she weeps. Which, by the way, is not the best thing to do when you're a cow. Tears get in the grass. But Hera is watching. Always. From a polished silver mirror the size of a dinner plate, held in the hands of an oracle 3 towns over. The oracle doesn't know she's a mirror stand today. She just knows her elbows are tingling and the wine's turned bitter. Hera squints at the reflection. And you wonder, not for the first time, does she feel bad? Does she ever wonder if there's a better way to handle betrayal than transmogrifying someone into livestock? Or is she just tired of pretending her marriage is a partnership? Of pretending loyalty is symmetrical? Eventually, Zeus intervenes. Kind of. He sends Hermes. Young, clever, winged sandals and all. The god of thieves, trickery, and inconvenient errands. Hermes finds Argus still guarding Io. All 100 eyes blinking, winking, watching. But Hermes isn't known for brute force. He sits. He plays music, tells stories, lulls Argus into a sleep so deep it silences history itself. And when the last eye closes, he acts. Argus never opens them again. Mainstream myth confirms. This was one of Hera's few real losses. She had invested in Argus, not just as a guard, but as an extension of her will. When he fell, something inside her calcified. She gathered his eyes. Not with rage, with care. Set them in the tail of the bird now forever tethered to her image. Not just as decoration, as reminder. That loyalty can be ornamental. That beauty can carry the burden of loss. Historians still argue why Hera chose the peacock. Peacocks weren't native to Greece. They likely came from Persia or India. Exotic, loud, a little ridiculous. Perfect, in other words. Some scholars suggest the myth of Io was originally separate from Hera and was merged later to enhance her narrative reach. Others say Hera adopted these symbols the way any queen does, strategically, to shape her iconography. Not every temple has thunderbolts, but you can bet your last olive that Hera's statues come with a peacock nearby, tail fully fanned, eyes unblinking. You leave the field. Io keeps walking. Hera, from Olympus, says nothing. But one of her peacocks lifts its head, screeches into the afternoon like a rusted hinge swung open on ancient guilt. You float upward, away from the earthbound mess, back to the marble halls, where Hera stands beneath a fresco showing the same story, already centuries old. She gazes at it like it's weather. Unavoidable. Bigger than her. But still irritating. And you start to understand. She doesn't see herself as cruel. She sees herself as consistent. Which, in her mind, is the nobler virtue. And much harder to worship. Another day. Another silence. Another mortal turned into a symbol. And still, Hera's sandals don't scuff the floor. Her footsteps are soundless. Only her birds make noise now. You return to her chambers, where incense curls toward the ceiling in little plumes of floral smoke. The goddess removes her crown, brushes her hair, and pauses, only for a second, then sets the brush down. Not in a hurry. Just done for today. Because even goddesses get tired of being right. The next morning, if Olympus has mornings, Hera is already awake. Not just awake. Alert. She moves through her garden like someone inspecting the perimeter of a very elegant battlefield. Peacocks trail behind her like sentient accessories. Their feathers rattle like wind chimes when she walks too quickly. You follow a few paces back, careful not to step on the marble inlays shaped like olive leaves. And today, she's planning something. Not a war. Not a thunderstorm. A wedding. Which, for Hera, is more or less the same thing. In the mortal world, someone's tying the knot. A princess, likely, or a particularly nervous shepherd's daughter marrying above her class. Either way, a sacrifice has been made. Peacock feathers, goat milk, 3 coins tossed into a sacred well. The usual. And Hera has taken notice. Because she always does. When mortals invoke her name in love, whether in reverence or desperation, she listens. She doesn't always respond. But when she does, it's with flair. She floats down into the mortal realm. In disguise, of course. No one can handle divine form before breakfast. This time, she appears as a stately matron with impressive eyebrows and the kind of posture that says, "Don't test me. I raised 3 divine children, and one of them breathes fire." She strolls into the bride's chamber, looks around, sniffs the garlands, tilts her head at the dowry pile, and makes a few pointed comments about floral choices and the number of goats involved. The bride, unaware, thanks her profusely, and Hera, smiling just slightly, blesses the marriage, which sounds wonderful. Until you realize what a Hera blessed marriage looks like. Mainstream historical note. In ancient Greece, marriages were contractual, often political. Love was optional. Property was not. And Hera's role as the goddess of marriage didn't mean she promoted romantic bliss. She upheld the institution, which means she wanted the vows honored. Even if the couple didn't like each other. Even if one of them turned into a bull once a month and wandered off. the bride receives her blessing. She also receives a deeply cryptic dream about olive trees and golden chains that no one can quite interpret. Some say it means fertility. Some say it means trouble. But everyone agrees. It's Hera's way of saying, I see you. And that's not always comforting. You float beside her as she reappears in Olympus. She brushes mortal dust from her sleeves like it's pollen, then heads to the Hall of Family Affairs, a dimly lit chamber lined with statues of her children. You pause at each one. Hephaestus, born of Hera alone, without Zeus, a brilliant smith, but born with a limp and a grudge. Ares, the god of war, always too loud, too eager. Hera loves him anyway. Or maybe she just understands his rage. Hebe, cupbearer to the gods, forever youthful, the one Hera actually brags about. And Eileithyia, goddess of childbirth, who mostly stays quiet unless summoned. A familiar trait. Each statue is slightly imperfect. Not chipped. Just off. As if Hera asked the sculptor to include a hint of realism. Or a little bitterness. Quirky detail you'd never guess. Despite being the goddess of marriage, Hera was rarely depicted with Zeus in actual ceremony scenes. Art favored her alone. Seated. Composed. Flanked by symbols, the lotus staff, the diadem, and of course, the peacock. Scholars speculate this was deliberate. A visual separation. As if even artists understood. She was married to the concept of marriage, not the reality. And yet, she still shows up for the weddings. Still sends signs, dreams, omens. Still blesses mortals who invoke her, even if they're doomed to spend the rest of their lives arguing about whose turn it is to fetch water. Why? Because Hera doesn't do hope. She does expectations. And she expects mortals to try. To keep the vows. To hold the line. To endure. Even when the furniture is shaking from thunder and someone's been turned into a pine tree again. Back in Olympus, she stands alone, hands folded. She looks up, not at the clouds, but at a mosaic above the hall's entry. It shows a pair of doves, sitting on a branch. They're facing away from each other, but the branch connects them. And beneath it, a single word carved in old script. Binding. Not love. Not peace. Just that. Hera nods, approving, then walks away, her peacocks falling into step behind her. The wedding will go fine. Or it won't. But it was never about the outcome. It was about the vow. Later that week, if gods track weeks at all, you find yourself floating above a cradle. The air smells like honey, linen, and faintly, snakes. You're in Thebes, a mortal city, and the baby you're watching, already lifting furniture. He's got curls, chubby cheeks, and an unsettling glint in his eye. You're looking at Heracles, or as you know him from Latinized tales, Hercules. But in this house, right now, he's just a newborn, sleeping peacefully, which, unfortunately, never lasts long in stories involving Hera. She knows about him. Of course she does. The mother may be mortal, but the child sent is pure Olympus. Specifically, Zeus sent it. And Hera has had enough. Not enough rage to start a war, but just enough to send a couple of snakes. Not metaphorical ones. Real ones. Too long. Slithering ribbons of divine justice. sent to wriggle into the nursery and deal with it. Mainstream myth confirms this scene. Baby Heracles, faced with two serpents in his crib, does not cry. He grabs them by the neck and strangles them like they're teething toys. The maid screams. The mother faints. And Hera, watching from the clouds, does something unusual. She pauses, because even she didn't expect that. Now, here's where things get complicated. You might expect this to be the end of Hera's grudge. But no. This is where it starts. Because the child didn't just survive. He thrived. And that, in Hera's view, is almost rude. She doesn't attack again. Not directly. But she makes sure that wherever Heracles goes, there's always a challenge. A complication. A task. 12 of them. Actually. But that's a story for another night. Back in Olympus, you float past Hera's private chamber. She's pouring tea from a golden kettle shaped like a goat. Her expression, mildly irritated. As if she just remembered someone borrowed a tunic and never gave it back. But centuries ago. You get the sense that the snakes were just the opening act. Heracles may have strength, but Hera has patience and an almost bureaucratic commitment to petty long games. Quirky tidbit. In one version of the myth, Hera accidentally breastfeeds Heracles. Yes. Zeus brings the child to her in disguise, hoping that divine milk will make the boy immortal. Hera, half asleep, obliges. But when she realizes who it is, she jerks back. Milk sprays across the heavens. The result, the Milky Way. So the next time you look up at the stars, just know they might be breast milk from a divine misunderstanding. Myths are weird like that. Historians still argue whether Hera's role in the Heracles myth is one of villainy or necessary balance. Some suggest she represents the cosmic resistance to unchecked masculinity, the divine counterforce to reckless heroism. Others say she's just written as the obstacle. Because in patriarchal myth cycles, powerful women often are. But even in opposition, Hera never loses her dignity. She doesn't rant. She edits. She doesn't destroy. She redirects. Usually into something that takes 20 years to recover from. Back on Earth, Heracles grows. And Hera watches. Sometimes with fury. Sometimes with fascination. He's reckless. Brash. Gloriously messy. The opposite of everything Hera values. And yet, there's a strange, reluctant respect there. She would never say it out loud. But maybe, just maybe, she's impressed. Annoyed, but impressed. You trail behind her as she walks to the edge of Olympus. Looks down at the mortal world like it's a cake she didn't order but still has to cut. She breathes in. Thunder rumbles softly behind her. One of her peacocks pecks at a stray cloud. She sighs. Not because she's tired. Because she knows this isn't the last illegitimate child she'll have to deal with. Or the last snake she'll send. But for now, she's done interfering. Mostly. And somewhere, in a mortal cradle, a baby kicks in his sleep. Still dreaming of serpents. It starts with a wedding, which is already suspicious. Because when Greek gods gather for a celebration, something usually gets cursed. Or stabbed. Or both. This one is no different. You find yourself drifting through an enormous hall, columns wrapped in ivy, torches flickering with enchanted fire, tables groaning under the weight of nectar, drizzled figs and roast boar. Everyone's here. Apollo is tuning his lyre. Ares is aggressively not dancing. Poseidon keeps accidentally splashing the floor near people he doesn't like. And at the center, the bride and groom, Thetis, a sea nymph, and Peleus, a mortal. Not exactly a power couple, but still. The guest list is divine. And Hera, of course, presides. She's resplendent tonight. Gold cuffs, perfect posture, a smile so sharp you could use it to open a letter. You follow her movements. Every step, a statement. Every nod, calculated. She didn't throw this party, but she did make sure it was memorable. Here's the thing. Hera, Athena, and Aphrodite are all in attendance, which means the room is already flammable. You don't put beauty, wisdom, and strategic grudge holding in the same room without consequences. And right on cue, a golden apple rolls into the banquet hall, inscribed with 3 little words. To the fairest. You know what this is. It's a trap. And the bait has landed right between the feet of 3 very competitive immortals. Mainstream myth names the culprit, Eris, goddess of discord. She wasn't invited, which is honestly fair. Her RSVP etiquette is famously violent. So, in a divine version of revenge, petty, she sends the apple instead. And it works perfectly. Because nothing sparks chaos like an open-ended compliment aimed at 3 jealous deities. You watch as Hera narrows her eyes. Athena crosses her arms. Aphrodite smiles, already calculating. They all reach for the apple, simultaneously. And suddenly, the air goes very quiet. No one moves. Not even the peacocks. You float backward a little. Instinctively. You've seen hurricanes. They look less dangerous than this moment. Now, to avoid a full-on celestial slap fight, someone suggests arbitration. A mortal. Specifically, a shepherd prince named Paris. Not exactly qualified, but conveniently handsome. The gods agree. Sort of. And the 3 goddesses descend from Olympus to present their cases. Each bribe is more extravagant than the last. Athena offers wisdom and skill in war. Aphrodite offers the love of the most beautiful woman on earth. And Hera, she offers power, rulership over all of Asia, and unmeasurable wealth. Not love, not glory, control. Because Hera doesn't do subtle. She does kingdoms. Paris picks Aphrodite. Of course he does. He's a young man and she's Aphrodite. And with that choice, the apple is gone. The judgment is made. And the wedding party officially implodes. Hera says nothing. At first, she simply raises one perfect eyebrow, turns on her heel, and walks away. The wind hisses in her wake. Quirky tidbit. Some versions of the myth say Hera's offer wasn't just about land. It was about dominion over fate itself. That she would make Paris not just king, but history's hinge. She wasn't offering a gift. She was offering inevitability. And when he declined, well, let's just say Hera keeps receipts. Historians still debate the symbolic meaning of the judgment of Paris. Some argue it marks the transfer of mythic focus, from divine feuds to mortal wars. Others think it's just a convenient setup for the Trojan War narrative engine. But Hera's reaction is what lingers. She doesn't lash out immediately. She doesn't curse Paris on the spot. She does something far worse. She waits. You trail behind her as she returns to Olympus. Her peacocks squawk uneasily. She passes Athena in the hallway, who's also furious, but more open about it. Ares avoids both of them. Even Hestia finds a reason to check on the hearth. And Hera, she begins preparing for a war that hasn't started yet. One that will last 10 years, involve gods and mortals alike, and ruin Troy. All because someone picked the wrong goddess at a wedding. You arrive at her private sanctuary. It's darker than usual. The incense tonight smells less like flowers, more like smoke. And for once, Hera doesn't look triumphant. She looks focused. Because this isn't just about vanity. It's about insult. And for Hera, that means consequences. Whether next week or next century, someone will pay. So she leans back, closes her eyes, listens to the wind, and waits for the first ship to sail from Sparta. You open your eyes to the sound of oars slicing water. You're aboard a ship now, one of many. The sea is restless. The sails strain. The horizon is full of thunder that hasn't quite arrived. You're watching the Trojan War begin. Not with blood, yet. With silence. Tense, anticipatory silence. The Greeks are crossing the Aegean. Helen is already gone, spirited away by Paris to Troy. And 1,000 ships follow. And back on Olympus, Hera is watching. Carefully. Beautifully. And with just the faintest twitch at the corner of her mouth. Like someone who's reading a play for the second time and knows exactly when the worst parts happen. She's not alone in her vengeance. Athena's beside her, still sore about the apple. Together, they form a divine tag team of war, meddling with surgical precision. The Greeks have no idea how much of their strategy is actually just divine ego playing chess. You float beside Hera as she hovers above the battlefield, never descending. She doesn't dirty her hands. She just adjusts the wind, tweaks morale, and, when she really wants to make a point, whispers into the ear of a general mid. Dream. It's elegant. Terrifying. Kind of admirable. Mainstream myth tells us that Hera fights for the Greeks. Not because she loves them. Because she really hates the Trojans. Specifically, Paris. She's not above grudge warfare. And when you're immortal, you've got the time. You drift closer to the battlefield. The air crackles with tension. Hera's not a war goddess. That's Ares' thing. But Ares is loud and messy. Hera is precise. You see her nudge a cloud. A mist rolls in. Suddenly, a Greek commander accidentally stumbles into the perfect position for a surprise attack. Coincidence. Not a chance. You float back up to Olympus, where the other gods are starting to bicker. Zeus, as usual, is pretending to be neutral. You know better. He watches Hera with an expression that says, "Please don't embarrass me in front of the sea gods." She doesn't answer. She just smiles, pours another goblet of pomegranate wine, and places a bet on the Greeks. Quirky historical note. In Homer's Iliad, Hera actually seduces Zeus mid wore to distract him from helping the Trojans. She borrows Aphrodite's magic belt, a divine accessory guaranteed to render the wearer utterly irresistible, then approaches Zeus on Mount Ida with a smile, some well-placed compliments, and just enough strategic cleavage to delay the god of thunder for a full afternoon. Meanwhile, the Greeks rally. Coincidence? Please. Hera weaponizes affection like it's a trained hawk. Historians still argue whether this moment was comic relief or commentary. Is Hera a manipulative spouse, undermining her husband? Or is she the smartest strategist in the pantheon, using every available tool, including flirtation, to shape history? Either way, the result is the same. Zeus is distracted, Troy bleeds, and Hera's wine stays chilled. You pause at the edge of the clouds. The war rages below, but Hera remains untouched. Not apathetic, just deliberate. She doesn't celebrate the carnage. She observes, as if every fallen soldier, every shattered shield, is one more petal plucked from the flower of Paris's poor decision. And yet, there's something in her eyes. Not regret, but weariness. Because even victories have a cost. And even petty revenge, when pursued for a decade, starts to feel like homework. But Hera finishes what she starts. Always. The walls of Troy still stand. For now. But Hera knows their days are numbered. Not because of swords. Because of whispers. Because of promises made to the wrong gods. Because when you insult Hera, the punishment is rarely immediate. It arrives like winter. Gradual. Chilling. Inevitable. You watch as she turns away from the battlefield. Her eyes fall on a bowl of figs. She picks one, eats it slowly, and somewhere below, a Greek hero stumbles into unexpected glory. There is no trumpet for her triumph, just the sound of a peacock rustling its feathers, and a city one day closer to falling. Olympus is quieter now, not peaceful, just holding its breath. You float through the corridors like a feather caught in a still draft. The war below simmers, and for the first time in weeks, Hera is not meddling. She's seated at the divine banquet table, and across from her sits Hephaestus, her son. The room smells of ozone and molten bronze, a forge god's cologne. You notice the tension between them right away. It's not cold, but it's not warm either. They talk in half sentences. She asks if he's eating enough. He grunts something about inventing a self, refilling goblet. It's progress. For them. Mainstream myth says Hephaestus was born from Hera alone. No father. Just pure divine parthenogenesis. Zeus had Athena, sprung from his forehead. So Hera responded in kind, crafting a son from her own essence. The gods called it equal. But then, upon seeing the child's twisted foot, Hera hesitated. Or so the stories say. Some versions claim she flung him from Olympus herself. Others say Zeus did. Either way, Hephaestus fell. For a long, long time. Until he landed in the sea and was raised by nymphs. And for centuries, the forge god carried that fall like a grudge tucked behind his hammer. You watch them now, exchanging brittle pleasantries. A mother and son with history. Not the sweet kind. The mythic kind. But he still comes when she calls. Because gods don't abandon their domains. And Hera Hera needs him tonight. There's armor to be made. For Achilles. Yes, that Achilles. Golden boy of the Greeks. Annoyingly fast. Recklessly brave. Fated to die young and make it everyone else's problem. Hera likes him. Not personally. She doesn't do personal. But he's useful. And if his mother Thetis wants armor forged by a god, well, Hera nudges Hephaestus in the right direction. She doesn't beg. She just asks. Which, coming from her, is more persuasive than thunderbolts. You watch Hephaestus rise. He limps slightly, but deliberately. Not with shame. With ownership. And as he leaves the hall, Hera exhales. Not relief. Not regret. Just release. Because even gods have complicated families. Especially when those families are weaponized. Quirky footnote for you. Despite his rocky childhood, Hephaestus is one of the few gods who actually builds things. Palaces. Thrones. Automatons. He once made Hera a golden chair that, when she sat in it, locked her in place. For days. It was a prank. Or a protest. Depending on who you ask. She didn't laugh. But eventually forgave him. Probably. Historians still debate what Hephaestus represents. Is he the outcast genius? The symbol of resilience? The god whose limp makes him more human, and thus more relatable? Or is he just Hera's revenge? Child. Born not out of love, but rivalry. Crafted to prove a point, and then left to prove the rest on his own. Scholars argue. Statues remain silent. And Hera, she sips her wine. She's heard it all before. You return to her side as she watches the forge light flicker in the distance. The armor will be ready soon. And Achilles will wear it like prophecy. But tonight, Hera sets her goblet down. She walks the long marble corridor to the hall of service. There, she passes statues of lesser gods, messengers, household spirits, minor deities. They bow. She doesn't respond. Not out of arrogance. Out of calculation. Because Hera knows everyone's role, including hers. She stops before a mosaic. It shows her. Not as a queen. Not as a wife. But as a general. Crowned. Stern. Surrounded by sacred animals and smoking altars. And beneath it, carved in Greek, she watches. She weighs. She waits. And in this moment, that's exactly what she's doing. Waiting. For the next decision. The next insult. The next myth to shape. You follow her as she walks back to her chamber. A single peacock trails behind her. And far below, in the mortal world, a forge glows like a heartbeat. The stars shift. The wind cools. And somewhere across the mortal realm, a goblet tips over in a temple, spilling wine that was meant for Hera. Not out of disrespect. Just clumsiness. Still, she notices. You're with her as she turns slightly, brows narrowing, not in fury, but in faint, philosophical disappointment. It's not about the wine. It's the principle. Mortals forget. They always do. But Hera remembers everything. She drifts into the banquet hall of Olympus. It's nearly empty now. Just a few embers glowing in bronze braziers. The scent of old nectar and leftover olives. Across the long marble table sits her daughter, Hebe. Young, radiant, perpetually pleasant in a way that borders on suspicious. She pours ambrosia into goblets with the calm efficiency of someone who's never known war, betrayal, or unsolicited prophecy. You watch Hera watch her. There's something complex in her gaze. Pride, maybe, mixed with a touch of envy. Not for Hebe's beauty, but for her clean emotional slate. Mainstream myth says Hebe served as cupbearer to the gods, refilling their ambrosia, ensuring their immortality. An unglamorous job, really, but vital, because nothing on Olympus works unless someone manages the drinks. And Hera, she placed her there, not because she had to, because she wanted at least one thing to stay simple. But then came Heracles again. Grown now. Glorious. Problematic. Exhausting. And after death, elevated to Olympus. A god. Not just a guest. And what happens? He marries Hebe. Because of course he does. Because even in death, he somehow ends up inside Hera's orbit. Again. You feel the tension as Hera stirs her drink. It's been centuries, and she still doesn't know exactly how she feels about her daughter marrying the man who strangled her snakes. Quirky little wrinkle. Some vase paintings suggest Hera approved of the marriage. Others hint she was furious and only pretended to smile. Still others imply she was simply tired of fighting fate, of losing Heracles over and over again. So she folded him into the family instead. Like a tooth you stop trying to pull and just learn to chew around. Historians are divided on the entire Heracles Hebe situation. Some see it as a symbolic union. Strength marrying youth. Power marrying grace. Others call it narrative cleanup. A way to fold loose mythic threads into a neat divine bow. But one theory suggests Hera allowed the marriage because it gave her control. Because if your enemy becomes your son, in law, you've won something. Even if it tastes a little bitter. You watch now as Hebe offers her mother a goblet. Hera accepts it. Sips. Pauses. Then smiles. Just slightly. A real smile. One that says, fine. He's in the family now. But I'm still watching him. And from across the hall, you hear Heracles sneeze. Coincidence? Absolutely not. Further down the corridor, another figure limps into view. Hephaestus. Again. Carrying a half-melted lantern, mumbling about needing more light in the forge. Hebe greets him cheerfully. He grunts. You get the feeling family dinners on Olympus are complicated. They all orbit each other like moons that occasionally collide, but never break apart. And Hera, she remains the gravity, the one that holds the table in place. She excuses herself quietly, walks past the Hall of Heroes, where mortals are occasionally honored with a statue or a star. She stops at one alcove, a marble carving of a woman holding a torch. No name, just a simple inscription. Priestess, remembered. She places a hand gently on the statue's arm. Says nothing, but you sense it's a memory. Perhaps of Io, or Semele, or someone else the myths forgot. But Hera didn't. Because even when the world forgets your name, she remembers who broke the vows, and who never got to make them. As she walks away, a peacock feather drifts down behind her. It lands silently on the cold stone. unnoticed, but not lost. Never lost. You blink, and the world has changed again. You're on an island now. Hot sun, blinding white rocks, the buzz of unseen insects. The trees here lean away from the heat, like they're trying to dodge history. And somewhere in this dry landscape, a woman screams. Not in pain, in frustration, because she's trying to give birth, and she's not allowed to. By Hera. You walk slowly toward the sound, sandals crunching dusty earth. It's not a battlefield, not a temple, just a quiet standoff between divine bureaucracy and basic biology. The woman is Leto. Pregnant, exhausted, trying to find a place, any place, to bring her twins into the world. But every city, every island, every village turns her away. Why? Because Hera said so. Mainstream myth confirms it. When Hera learned that Zeus had gotten Leto pregnant, she banned all land from offering her shelter. That's not metaphorical. That's literal. No place on solid ground would let her rest. It wasn't just revenge. It was zoning law. Weaponized. You find her collapsed by the sea, barely breathing. Her skin the color of thunderclouds. One hand on her belly, one hand on the sand, and the earth trembles beneath her. Not out of pity, out of pressure. Because somewhere, far below, a small floating island stirs. Delos. Not anchored. Not land. Technically. A loophole. Which is exactly how Leto survives. She climbs aboard, clutches a palm tree, and finally, gives birth to Artemis. Then, hours later, Apollo. Two gods, born of defiance, sunlight, and technicalities. You drift back to Olympus, where Hera sits, poised, unbothered, on the outside. But you know better now. You've seen her hands tighten, heard the silence stretch. Because even queens lose now and then. And sometimes, those losses cry out in sunlight and shoot arrows at the moon. Quirky detail. Artemis was said to assist in her brother's birth, immediately after her own. Because in mythology, newborns sometimes moonlight as midwives. It's adorable and absurd, and somehow perfectly Hera, adjacent. A divine plan, ruined by twins and a floating island. Historians still debate why Hera punished Leto so intensely. Some suggest it wasn't personal. Leto was just next in line. Another name in Zeus's ever-growing spreadsheet of oops. Others believe Leto represented a deeper threat, an untouched goddess of the wilderness. Independent. Unclaimed. Exactly the kind of woman Hera couldn't stand not to control. But maybe, just maybe, it wasn't about Leto at all. Maybe it was about the system. Hera didn't build Olympus. She just married into it. And for thousands of years, she's been trying to make the floor plan bearable. Back on Delos, the twins grow fast. Gods tend to do that. Apollo becomes beautiful, musical, radiant. Artemis becomes sharp, silent, wild. And neither forgets how they got here, or who tried to stop them. You float above the clouds again. Back in Hera's garden. The peacocks blink lazily. A breeze stirs the myrtle. And Hera, goddess, queen, architect of impossible expectations, sips her tea. She doesn't mention Delos. She doesn't need to. She's already thinking ahead. To the next betrayal. The next vow broken. The next loophole she'll need to close. Because Hera doesn't forget. And Hera doesn't forgive. She just waits. And sometimes, waiting is worse. The sun is high when you return to the mortal world. But nothing feels warm. You're standing at the edge of a river. Not a grand one. A quiet, winding ribbon of water. And beside it walks a cow. Still. Again. Still Io. She's not lost anymore. Just permanently wandering. Her hooves leave little indentations in the mud. Her eyes, still entirely too human, blink slowly beneath long lashes. You've forgotten how long it's been. She hasn't. Because Hera doesn't just curse people. She assigns them endurance tests. The kind that stretch on for months. Years. Myths. You walk beside her in silence. She doesn't mind the company. And as you stroll, the scenery begins to change. Mountains rise. The air grows thin. The vegetation thins to olive scrub and stubborn pines. You're somewhere far east now. Maybe in Anatolia. Maybe beyond. Because Io has traveled across continents. A lonely pilgrimage mapped entirely by the consequences of one god's infidelity. And one goddess's refusal to look the other way. Mainstream myth tracks Io's journey through a dozen regions. She crosses seas, mountains, cultures. In some places, they worship her. In others, they pity her. Everywhere, they tell her story. But no one offers to break the curse. Because Hera's silence is ironclad. Eventually, Io finds a river. A wide one. Calm. And as she lowers her head to drink, a strange sensation ripples through her. The water glows faintly. A breeze stirs her fur. And just like that, the spell lifts. Not dramatically. No thunder. No peacock feathers raining from the sky. Just a return. Her limbs shift. Her eyes refocus. Her skin returns. She stands. Human. And the world doesn't even notice. You wonder, was it mercy? A moment of softness from Hera? Or did the goddess simply forget? Get bored? Move on? Quirky theory from a few classicists. Some say Io wasn't freed by forgiveness, but by fate. That the spell had a built in expiration. Or that another god, maybe Prometheus, maybe Artemis, intervened quietly. Because Hera never claimed responsibility and never gave credit. She just let the myth fade. Historians still argue what Io's story really means. Some say it's about exile. Others, about endurance. A few radical voices say it's not even Hera's story. That Hera is a narrative stand in for the cruelty of fate, the unfairness of divine politics. But you've seen how Hera works. It wasn't just punishment. It was precision. A slow, burning lesson for all Olympus to observe. This is what happens when you interfere with the queen. Not death. Not fire. But years of indignity. Loneliness. Endless. Hoof. Worn miles. Back in Olympus, Hera stands before a reflecting pool. She doesn't look into it. She watches through it. Sees a woman, barefoot, blinking, newly restored, sinking to her knees by a riverbank. And Hera says nothing. Not out of cruelty. Not even out of pride. Out of calculation. Because even punishment has a shelf life. And sometimes, letting someone go is its own kind of message. You glance at the pool. The ripples fade. And Hera turns away, already thinking about the next story. The next ceremony. The next mortal whose name will be carved into marble. Or scratched off entirely. Because myths don't end when the pain does. They end when Hera decides they've served their purpose. You're in the garden again. It's dusk now. That rich, humming kind of dusk that turns marble gold and makes even the peacocks pause their pacing. Hera is seated on a low bench, one hand resting on the head of her quietest bird. It doesn't squawk. It just looks up at her. With one of those eyes. You know the ones. The many-eyed feathers. Argus's legacy. Still shimmer faintly in the fading light. You get the sense that the bird understands more than it should. And that Hera is perfectly fine with that. After all, she didn't choose the peacock because it was lovely. She chose it because it remembers. You walk slowly along the gravel path, your sandals crunching like distant thunder. All around you, the garden is alive. But softly. Lavender nods in the breeze. Jasmine exhales its sleepy perfume. And somewhere out of sight, a temple bell rings exactly once. There's a mortal kneeling in the courtyard. You didn't notice her at first. She's dressed simply. No gold. No incense. Just an offering of wildflowers and a threadbare prayer. She doesn't ask for wealth. She asks to be heard. And Hera listens. She doesn't descend. She doesn't thunder. She just watches. Eyes steady. Posture straight. Like a queen measuring the sincerity of a whispered wish. Mainstream myth often forgets this part of Hera. The part that does protect. The part that does bless. But it's there. In ancient votives. In scratched clay tablets. In quiet altars lit not out of fear, but loyalty. Because while Zeus gives thunder and spectacle, Hera gives structure. The vow. The bond. The reason people stay after the wedding. You kneel beside the mortal. She doesn't see you. Of course not. But you feel her pulse in the air. Steady. Honest. She's asking for her husband to return safely. Or, if not that, then at least not in shame. She doesn't demand. She asks. And somehow, Hera hears that most of all. Quirky footnote. In some rural parts of ancient Greece, Hera had feast days where no men were allowed. Just women. Gathering in secret to honor her with songs, dances, and stories too old to write down. Not because she hated men, but because she saw women. In their joy, in their limits, in the way they carried kingdoms without thrones. And Hera, for all her wrath, never forgot who lit the hearth. Historians still argue whether these women, only rituals were acts of empowerment or just social necessity. But either way, Hera was the name they called. Not for miracles. For justice. For memory. For the kind of strength that doesn't shatter, but endures. Back in the garden, Hera stands. The peacock straightens. She walks slowly to a basin and washes her hands. No ceremony. Just Calm. The mortal is gone now. Her offering accepted. Her prayer folded into the air like warm linen. And Hera says nothing. Because sometimes, a queen doesn't need to speak to rule. She just needs to notice. You walk with her to the edge of the garden. The stars are out now. Quiet. Scattered. Blinking like the eyes in her birds' tails. She looks up. Not for answers, but for balance. Because even gods look for symmetry in the chaos. And Hera, she holds it in her hands, with teeth clenched and nails manicured. Tonight, the palace is almost too quiet. You know that kind of silence. The kind that leans in, as if the walls are waiting for someone to say the wrong thing. You follow Hera through a narrow corridor lit by floating lanterns. Small, golden flames suspended midair, flickering like they're nervous. She's heading to the east wing, to the private sanctum, where even gods knock before entering. Inside, the air smells of cedar wood and something faintly bitter, like ink or old resolve. She's come to sit with the past. The chamber is full of scrolls. Not prophecy. Not poetry. Records. Genealogies. Oaths. Vows. Stacks of fragile papyrus, each carefully inscribed with the names of mortals who once made promises under her gaze. You watch as she selects one at random. Unrolls it slowly. Reads. Her lips move, but only slightly, as if tasting the syllables of forgotten lives. Mainstream historical fact. The Greeks believed Hera had temples not just for worship, but for marital registration. In some cities, wedding contracts were stored in her sanctuaries. She wasn't just the goddess of marriage. She was the clerk of permanence, the witness, the archivist of devotion. Not romance. Responsibility. You walk behind her as she lays the scroll flat on a marble slab. It lists names, dates, simple phrases like bound in the third year or renewed after the storm. No poetry, just truth. You wonder if anyone remembers these people now. Hera does. She remembers everyone. A rustle behind you. Another god enters. Apollo. Radiant. Aloof. Wearing the expression of someone who just walked in on a meeting they forgot they were scheduled for. Still keeping records. He asks, with a grin that's more habit than happiness. Hera doesn't look up. Yes. Just that. One word. Sharp enough to snip the smile off his face. He lingers for a moment, then bows slightly and exits. Not out of fear, out of respect. Because even the sun god knows better than to challenge Hera on matters of memory. Quirky myth. Mostly forgotten now. There was once a time when Hera presided over reconciliations. Not just weddings. She was invoked by couples trying to rebuild what was broken. One fragment of an old ritual describes two lovers, separated by sea and war, returning to her altar with nothing but a laurel wreath and a promise to begin again. No one remembers if it worked. But Hera accepted the offering. That's what mattered. Historians still argue whether this forgiving aspect of Hera was ever real, or if it was added later, to soften her image. Some point to temple inscriptions asking her to lift the weight. Others say it's wishful thinking, trying to find maternal comfort in a goddess carved from rules. But maybe that's the point. Maybe Hera wasn't cruel. She was consistent. And in a world of shapeshifters and prophecy, twisters, That was rare enough to worship. Back in the chamber, Hera rolls the scroll back up, places it carefully on the shelf. One of thousands, each a thread in a tapestry of promises. Some kept, some broken, all recorded. She steps into the center of the room, closes her eyes, breathes, and for just a moment, she looks tired. Not in the physical sense, in the divine sense. The fatigue of having watched humanity repeat itself, century after century, without ever getting better at commitment. But she doesn't cry. She doesn't curse. She just opens her eyes and picks up the next scroll. Because someone has to keep the record. And Hera never looks away. It's almost morning. Not that time works quite the same way on Olympus. But still, the air has that strange, silvery calm that only appears right before the gods wake up and start meddling again. You're walking through the outer colonnade of the palace. The breeze lifts your cloak gently. And Hera, she's already up. She doesn't sleep much. Too many loose threads. Too many stories that still need watching. Tonight, she's in the Hall of Offerings. A high, vaulted chamber filled with centuries of gifts. Some grand, some ridiculous, all offered in her name. There are golden wreaths, carved marble doves, half-finished poems from desperate poets. There's a single olive pit wrapped in red silk, and a wooden comb, worn smooth by worry. All tokens from mortals hoping she'll intervene, or forgive, or notice. And she does. She always does. Even if she doesn't respond. Mainstream fact. Hera's cult was one of the oldest in Greece, predating even Zeus in some regions. In places like Samos and Argos, she wasn't just a consort. She was the deity. The one you prayed to for harvest, childbirth, oaths, protection. She wasn't secondary. She was sovereign. And in those sanctuaries, she didn't share the temple with anyone. Not even her husband. You watch as she moves through the room, trailing one finger along the edge of a bronze bowl. She pauses at a cracked terracotta statue, clearly old, clearly humble. She lifts it, smiles. It's not the lavish tributes that last. It's the quiet ones, the ones made by hands that believed. In the far corner, a pedestal stands with nothing on it. A blank space. You ask why. She doesn't answer. Not with words. Just a small, raised eyebrow. And somehow you know. That space is for what hasn't been given yet. A promise unmade. A vow unspoken. Or perhaps, an apology never offered. Quirky detail you wouldn't expect. In some ancient festivals, Hera's statues were bathed in sacred rivers and dressed in new robes. Not to cleanse her, but to renew the bond. To show that mortals hadn't forgotten. It was less worship, more check in. A divine reminder that relationships, even with gods, need tending. Historians still debate the evolution of her image. Was she always so strict? Was she ever soft? Was the peacock always hers? Or was that a late mythic flourish? The answers blur, as they do with any woman rewritten by centuries of men with chisels. But the result remains. A goddess who endures. Not because she is adored, but because she is respected. And because she expects more from you than you expect from yourself. Outside the chamber, the light shifts. A new day begins. Zeus stirs in the west wing, already stretching, already pretending yesterday didn't happen. Apollo tunes his lyre. Artemis is still in the woods somewhere, avoiding everyone. And Hera, she steps out onto the balcony. The clouds part gently. The breeze is cool. And below, on Earth, a woman whispers her name before drinking the first water of the day. She doesn't ask for love. She asks for strength. And Hera listens. Always. You stand beside her as she surveys the mortal world. It's messy, tender, impossible, and hers to oversee. She folds her arms, breathes in, and says, softly, let's begin again. And now, let it all drift away. Let the golden columns of Olympus fade into mist. Let the sound of rustling peacock feathers soften, until it's just the wind in your own curtains. You've walked through 1,000 years of myths tonight. You've followed the footsteps of a queen, watched her rage quietly, remembered loudly, forgave, rarely, but ruled, always. And maybe now, as your breath slows and your blanket wraps just a little tighter, you're starting to understand her. Not love her. Not excuse her. Just understand that sometimes power wears heels instead of armor. That sometimes revenge is cold tea in a ledger full of names. That dignity doesn't shout. It whispers and waits. If your eyes are still open, let them blur. Let the marble halls melt into shadow. Let the gods stop bickering in the distance. Let the myths settle. Because the world will still be messy in the morning. But you're allowed to rest now. Hera's peacocks are tucked away. Her scrolls are sealed. Even the stars have begun to blink slower. You're safe here. No oaths to swear. No wars to start. Just breath. And quiet. And a story that's finished its walk across your mind. So sleep. Sleep like a goddess whose temple candles have finally burned low. Sleep like a vow kept. Sleep like Hera after a long day of remembering everything. And letting just a little of it go.